In this part 2 of 2 episodes, we break down world building as a means of maximizing storytelling. Make sure to like, follow, and subscribe whether you're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube. And share this episode with a friend if you'd be so kind. My name is GM Smudge, and welcome to the Smudgecast. What's up, everyone, whenever or wherever you are, and again, super excited to continue part 2 of world building with my good friend Eric.
Hello.
Already, if you haven't, please go listen to episode the first part of this. If you haven't, it'll give a way more preface and the building blocks, like you said, the foundations of world building. As we now go into part 2, we're hitting a little bit more on the granular aspects of filling in the foundations in a way. But again, love to really quick just hit on who you are, what you do, and
My name's Eric. I've been here the whole time.
Oh.
I am Steven's friend who has been working with him on various Dungeons and Dragons projects and other creative endeavors for years. I draw and make little dioramas that you can print out and have on your tabletop as a very affordable gaming piece. If you'd like to go to my @Shafkus Patreon and find it, or on Instagram or Twitter. But I also have written quite a bit and done some dungeon mastering of my own for several years. So doing all that, I love the aspects of creating a world that feels lived in. And that's why I'm here to talk to Steven today.
Well, that's what you're brilliant at. And we've had many conversations about stories. And like, I'll come to you with like, dude, I have no idea what I should do. Help me, please. And
I'm not usually the idea guy. I'm the idea improver guy. Like, you'll say, like, I've got like 12% of a plan, and I'll be like, oh, it'd be really great if you did this. But as far as coming up with that first 12%, Steven is definitely the guy who's better.
Well, it's just, which again, why we work really, really well together. And we love storytelling. We love flavor. We love world building as it makes sense per the story, not world building for the sake of just doing it, which again, you like doing that, cool beans. I don't have time to just like create for hours with just for the sake of creating. I don't know.
Yeah, you got hobbies, man, but like ain't nobody got time for that. I do stuff that if this is going to give me joy,
right,
or help with the game in any way, let's do it. Let's build it out. If not, then let's do it later when it actually makes sense.
Exactly. So a little bit of a preface again per last episode to here is world building. You could have many goals. You could have many reasons on why you do it. Make sure, though, that it makes sense for the story. That's like the anchor to it all. And if you don't have time, just do your best with what you can fill in.
Right. And you can always add more later. Exactly. As we talked about last week. Last week, we kind of went from the top down, talking about the creating of the world, and worked our way through creating the different gods and the history of the world. And now I think we're going to go even deeper. We're
going deeper. We're going into said world, like into the last 5 that we're going to be hitting on right now, which is going to be the inhabitants and races, the continents, location, the terrain, the kingdoms and the organizations, the creatures and monsters, and lastly, the calendar, the seasons, and the holidays, which all of those things are very granular. They're like very specific too, which I think with the other set, you could get away, in my opinion, you can get away with kind of being a little bit more big picture, while these, it's going to be a little bit harder to stay too big picture. Or what do you think?
I think you have to have some stuff written down, or you're going to contradict yourself. With the creation of the world, you can get vague. With like the gods of the universe, you can have vagaries and inconsistencies that can self-correct. But if you're like, this town is full of orcs, and then next week you're like, this is an elven town full of elves. You're like,
wait, what?
Huh? One of your players is going to call you out, and they're going to say, you don't make no sense.
And I think that these ones for world building may take a little bit more time, and it may be a little bit more difficult to create. But before we get in, I think something that we've built to even help with that when you're world building, or even just kind of creating story and you just need some inspiration, we created the inspiration
vault.
Go ahead.
So yeah, the first section that we talked about last week was really high level. But then when you get into the granular details, sometimes it is hard to be that creative, and it is hard to figure out like I'm stuck. I'm in a rut. I need a new idea for this. So over the course of several months, Stephen and I put together like a list of really just different things that can help you fill out some of the things we're going to talk about in the world. NPC characters, different items and magical items and weapons and stuff. We have different plot twists or dungeons or rooms or places to go to. Not any of it you have to like use verbatim, but as a like a starting point.
Yep.
And
It's exactly what it's for, truly, because there's so many resources out there already, but we just like using things that just help spark that idea or continue said idea that we can make sense
everybody's writing campaigns. Everybody's writing like in built out source books. We're not going to do better than those guys. There's a lot of really great material out there.
Yep.
So what we're saying is the parts that have helped us the most tactically, let's go build those out for people who need something quick and easy at their fingertips that isn't reading 15 pages of lore, but, oh, here's a quick paragraph to give me an idea about a trap.
Exactly. And we've got 2 editions thus far. One is the Dungeons edition with dungeon-specific story elements. And then we have a Session edition, which is about 20 plus different scene or session types, like espionage and a chase scene, or what are some other ones that we have in there?
We had the heist or
Right.
the tabula rasa, like the everybody's forgotten who they are scene. Like basically different like quote unquote gimmicks that can kind of help spice up your game. And so it's not just, well, this townspeople need us to go to a dungeon again. But instead, stuff that can add a little bit more flavor, change like what you're rolling. Instead of all of it is, investigations and perceptions. Instead, maybe this thing you're doing lots of sleight of hand and deceptions because you're having to break into a high society dinner. And those sorts of things that can help get planted really into any game, like any genre and any RPG, but planting in a different session type so that you feel like you're not stuck in a rut and you feel like you're having fun.
And you're not doing the same thing over and over again, because I find that happens. You get the combat situation that's typical. There's a bunch of things, you hit them. You get the same sort of role-play situations. You go to a shop, you do your thing. And the same thing, same explorative scenarios, which it's just like, what does everything look like? But in all 3 of those, there is way more options and opportunities for different type of storytelling. So,
We just all default to like the vanilla sometimes. And it's just good to have a list. And so we compiled that list and we've been adding to it. And now we have the Inspiration Vault. The first 2 elements are totally free and you can go visit his link and grab them. And we welcome any ideas you have for future sessions as well. We are working on number 3 right now.
Woo, love it. So that was a little shameless plug there, but I think I use really the session ones every time I write a session, because I put in a couple different scenes in there and it just flows so naturally.
It makes it so much more exciting and like you said, like the flow. The game feels more alive.
Yep.
When you're having a purpose besides like default mode. Like you say, okay, my purpose here is we're gonna go run this type of thing, and it gets all the players more hyped about like, here's the mission, we're all on the mission. Not every player is going to be great at every kind of thing, but it gets everybody like rallying,
100%. So then let's take that and talk about the player really quick, though. Within world building, we touched on it a in the part 1, but I want to hit a little bit more right here within player world building, because we all know that the GM is taking the time writing everything out. However, I think a GM out there, it's really important to allow the players to continue or further or create the world in their decision making, and you adapting for the world building, if that makes any sense.
So I'm going to tell a little story I heard on the internet. Alfonso Cuarón was making the 3rd Harry Potter film, and he, as part of the exercise of prepping for the movie, asked Rupert Grint and Emma Watson and Daniel Radcliffe to write a little essay about their characters and their mindset at this third movie. And Radcliffe wrote like a page or so about it, like a paragraph or two about his character. Emma Watson wrote like a 3-page, like full list about hers, and Rupert Grint didn't do the assignment. And
Maybe this is all very fitting.
yeah, and this is very fitting with the characters of Harry, Ron, and Hermione, and Harry, and so it fits the people that they were playing, and it's a funny story that they tell. But that also has happened with me, with the players I've worked with in Dungeons and Dragons. Is some people are writing out huge, detailed stories about their character's entire life story. Some people are like, here's a couple key points about my character that I want to build in. And some people are like, I'm a human fighter. That's it. And
maybe even not any of that.
yeah, I like to hit stuff.
There you go.
And that's okay. Like, and so with that, like, you're going to have people bring different stuff to the table, but world building should be something that's collaborative. So as people are coming to your game, you've got like this puzzle with like the edges of the puzzle built and a couple pieces, main pieces of the puzzle, a couple of the main figures put together, but there's a whole lot of the puzzle in the middle that's not filled in yet. So when your players are coming into the game, that's an opportunity to fill in a little bit of that puzzle with their perspective. And so if they say, hey, like, I don't know who my parents are, and I am a half elf, half human who has lived in poverty and has become a rogue. Yeah, that can be very typical, but okay, what parts of, as we're going to come into the game later and the elements later, like what parts of the world might that be that their parents came from?
Yeah.
How did their parents maybe meet or something? Or how did his, who is his dad or mom? Or is it somebody important maybe in history? Or like work out and how that can tie into some of the elements of the story and maybe enrich it and make that person and that character feel so much more connected to the game. Not everybody is the main character of every campaign, but if everybody has some connective tissue to what's going on, man, they're a lot more invested.
I love that. So again, if you're a player out there and you are, at least just know that you have some opportunity to be a progressor for the world. If you don't want to add anything, that's totally fine. If you don't want to just create a backstory where you're, like you said, you're a fighter, you just want to come hit things, that's totally cool. But GM, maybe even think through allowing your players to offer world building suggestions or story suggestions based on their character, their backstory, and what they're looking to do further. Because sometimes you create canon. Like sometimes in your story, you actually create the canon for something.
Absolutely. It happens all the time. As long as everybody's coming at it like, hey, just because they suggest this may not work for the game. There may have to be some back and forth. It's a collaboration. There have been scenarios where I've had players who really want to tell me how the world has worked so they can get their character to a certain place. And we've figured out ways to arrive at that same place with their character just by shifting a couple things around to fit everything else that was going on in the campaign. And I think having those short, and none of this was like 3-hour discussions. This would be like a handful of chats, IMs back and forth on Discord or something that like, oh, this is what I was thinking. Cool. What about this and this? Oh, excellent. It doesn't have to take up all your life, but getting that like preface with the characters before you start, I think that makes everything we're about to talk about a lot richer.
And with that being said, let's just jump right in with the next 5 here. Like I said, which are the inhabitants or the races, the continents, locations, terrain, the kingdoms, the organizations, the creatures and monsters, and lastly, the calendar seasons and the holidays, which, again, I think are pretty granular. I think now you're really talking about who's in the world, especially with the first ones with inhabitants or the races. Like, who are the very people that live and cultivate the world? Where are they located? Why were they there? If you had a civil war, you wrote in your history part between the elves and the dwarfs, like what's happening? Who are they? So how would you fill in that?
So I I'm somewhat old school in my D&D playing, and back in my day we didn't have no turtle people and bird people and And I at first was like, well, here's the main races, but your players may also want to be a different race. Like they're a cat person and we got to, they really want to do this. I'm not going to say, no, you can't be this person because I haven't bothered to think about how they fit in. That's not collaborative. So when you have, I like to start with the basics, the main characters that are the main races in the what do you call it? The player's handbook, the humans, elves, dwarves, halflings, tieflings, and then there's the expanded, races like half orcs and gnomes, and I'm blanking on a couple of the other ones, but like that they added on afterward. But I start there as like, how many of these are there? How much do they get along? Like, would it be common to see a party of a tiefling, a human, an elf, and a half orc, or would this be an insane occurrence that everywhere they go, they're treated like a freak show or treated like like that? That's an important distinction, and knowing like who is on the planet, how many of them are there, and as we come into continents and stuff, like vaguely knowing, is this a place where humans and elves cohabitate? Is this like elvish lands? These are human lands. These are dwarven lands. Like it, not everything is going to be a perfect melting pot of all characters distributed equally, and that just won't feel real. And so having like knowing where you are and where your story takes place, and knowing who the beings are that are there, I think is pretty important. I also think not just in the general, but like having, this is where people can also go overboard, but having a good dozen or 24 NPC inhabitants of like, or like critical figures in the world, or people that like, not just here's the hotel manager that they talk to every day, but like, okay, this area is run by this king, or this is the head guard who they might interact with or something. This is the king of this other realm that is their sworn enemy. Having some of those kind of main inhabitants at the ready, it's just good for consistency. Because if later on you're like, didn't you say the king's name was that before? Like they're gonna notice, they're jotting down notes and they're gonna pay attention. And then if your story doesn't make sense because you're making it on the fly, it's not gonna feel real. And so having not just the general idea about the races, but have like I always start with those ones, but I add in other races, and I'll say, oh, they want to be a turtle or something. Okay, I'll figure out how common those are. Maybe they're in this part of the world over here, and this person would be an immigrant from a foreign land, and that's a different slant that they can bring to the game. All of that builds in flavor, and it's definitely worth spending a little time on.
I would agree, and I'm thinking in my head, like even within the races, just like player's handbook stuff, like it talks about how likely an orc is within like a normal civilization in a main kingdom. Like maybe they're not. Like they offer that, like Forgotten Realms and material.
It's all Forgotten Realms material. Yeah,
yeah. Like they like offer it pretty well. And so if you're kind of just want to copy and paste, totally do that. But also know too that it could be interesting if your player does come to you and they say, no, I actually want to be a full orc tailor. Like I want them to be like a tailor for like suits.
Someone's got to make orc clothing.
They got to be, yeah, exactly. But it would be difficult if you're saying the kingdom though that you're starting in is human and dwarf,
and they've been at war with the orcs for years.
And so, but your player is like, no, but I really want to be an orc. Okay, it might, you really just have to balance that a bit, because it might be worth making it a work for them, but it also might be worth saying, okay, well, how can we bridge this together?
Right.
So
that could potentially take over the story quite a bit because of the like grenade you're throwing into the game, essentially.
Yeah, and then the player may feel like they're just taking a lot of their time with they're not going like, oh, it's about me and like I want to do all these things and like, oh, I'm so hated by everyone in this city.
It's good to know the limits and shared boundaries. Like,
yes.
Collaborative boundaries are things that you say, hey, we're going to create this world together, but know that this is the lay of the land, and these are the lay of the people, I guess. But if you know that and agree upon it, then you're not. Then when they're creating their character, they're not like shocked that, oh, this is causing lots of trouble. Like it, it's setting everybody up for success.
I started doing this a couple years ago. There, session backgrounds or background sessions. So you got session 0 plus all your campaign sessions. But I started doing background sessions where, and this was an idea from our friend Jesse, and I did it with him and a couple other players in our second campaign, where you actually go and play out main points in the character's life. From like when they were born to where they would be beginning. And that really helped navigate the players to understand their own story and their own character a little bit more. Plus it helped me with world building, the other NPCs that they're experiencing, and then in the world, and how they're experiencing culture, how they're experiencing the other races or other people around them. So that I think that's just an interesting, and it doesn't have to be like a 3-hour session. It could be an hour, and you could just talk through it a bit. But I think that one, if we're bridging player world building plus how do you operate within the world, within the races and the inhabitants. But yeah.
So, it's not like these are hard and fast rules, but you want to know, is it going to be normal for birdmen to walk around,
fly around
exactly, to fly around your town, or is that a super weird thing? And it's not saying that the whole campaign is about that, but that is important flavor for how you act as the DM and how your NPCs react, and for how your characters interact with each other.
Exactly. So as we dive a little bit deeper into this too, talking about the inhabitants and races, now we're going into like where they are and where they live in the continents, your locations, any specific terrain that matters for your story, the different land masses that make up the world, where they are, and why that would be. I remember when we first talked about your world, this was like 3 or 4 years ago, about the world that you had with the 7 different dragons.
Yeah.
And I remember you showing me your map.
Yeah, I took a literal map of our planet, erased the middle of it. So it's like 2 circles, basically. You can also do it with, there's different designs, like the Mercadian design of our map, basically something that lets you see the general outline of a 3-dimensional sphere. But I modeled it on paper. I just drew out here are these continents, and on the one circle, this kind of runs over here. So on the other side of the circle, I make sure it connects on the other side of the planet. But I drew out random squiggles and shapes. Literally, I think I started with scattered just dots around the board, and then just drew squiggly lines connecting the different dots, and then kind of making bigger land masses out of that. And then from there, I carved it up into countries. And this is my super complicated technical way of doing this, is I named all the countries. My friends' names or other funny names just slightly shifted. I just changed the letters around. And,
That's so funny.
And so then later on, the players would play, and they're go into this country wait, that's my name. Just backwards or whatever, and they get their little treat.
So I love that, but
I thought it was important for me to build that up front, just to have, these are all the places they can go.
And what does that do for a story? Because you have a map. I think we all talk about D&D. Always have a map. It's always fun. Yes, that's fun having a map, but what does knowing the continents, the locations, any specific terrain, having a map, what does it actually do for a story?
So first, you can kind of put in your mind and the players' minds, where in the world did they come from? Where are all these people's place of origin? Where are they now? Sometimes it's just really handy to see with a map to say oh, our journey has been from this little place to this little place. And sometimes it can make them feel insignificant in the grand scheme of the world. Yeah. But other times it's oh, you know what? I wonder what it's like over on that other place. That'd be cool to go over there sometime. And it adds more excitement and adventurous spirit for the future. We ended up with that one world I built, where I built the whole map for it. Spent a 5 years in there, and several campaigns going to different places. And then when COVID first hit, I ran, you were in it for a little bit. I ran a small campaign in just a different part of that world that no one ever got to go to before. And I got to just tell a fun side story. Now, when I say that, it's not like I had 185 countries and I knew all of the people in their I had names for stuff, but there was also, there's plenty of hitbed. Hitbed is the official word I come up with for the unknown. It's here there be dragons.
Okay.
You know, that's what they put on the old maps in the old days. Is you don't know what's beyond. You say, here there be dragons. So I shortened it to hitbed.
I'm young. I don't know that reference.
Yes. So here there be dragons was what they put on old maps in the real world when they didn't know what was out there. It was unexplored territory. As just sort of the way of saying...
That's so interesting. I never knew. That's so wild. Okay.
And so there's parts of the map where I was like, I don't know what's going to be there, but it'll be interesting when we get to that spot. But there's other parts where you say, okay, this is generally where the dwarves have lived. This is where the humans live. This is where they sort of coexist. Here's where the elves are from. Here's where the orcs are from. And here, like getting some of that basics on the planet also helps, because if you suddenly say, and there was a billion orc army that just came in here, and you're like, from where? Like,
if they're over and you have it like set on the other side of the world, how did they even get?
Like, how did that happen? Yeah, and so like that's the kind of stuff that makes the story seem inconsistent and incoherent. And having a clear map or idea of the framework, it just helps you stay on your own track, because we get excited and forget ourselves.
Totally. And what's even helpful, yes, you made your map, you made different names or whatever. There's so many maps you can Google and pull in.
Take someone else's.
And yeah, again, we're always talking about stealing, but I only say that too because like when I did the Eberron campaign specifically, it was so great to have that map because there was names of everything, but there was nothing that described what they were specifically, unless you went onto like Eberron Wiki on Google.
You could do whatever you wanted.
You could do whatever you wanted, which again is so brilliant. However, some people don't like that. Some people and GMs aren't storyteller specific. They just really want to take something and just throw it at the people and let them do whatever they want. But the challenge with that is that you have to be prepared in some way, shape, or form, whether that's like prepared to be unprepared or prepared in the sense of, I got to figure out what's where and why. Because the players will do crazy stuff and will try crazy stuff.
They will, whatever walls you build in your game, they will immediately break.
Literally or figuratively.
Yeah, exactly. And so also another component we haven't touched on really is it's also helpful not just to know like what countries are where or what people are where, but also like what does the land look or feel like, and having a general idea of mountains are over here. This is ocean stuff. Here is swampy land. Here is other, because it gives it consistency and reality. And like I think we default in the game to like the Princess Bride, where within a very short geographic area you have castles and towns, you have giant sea cliffs of insanity, you have the fire swamps that are all a convenient 10 minutes apart. And that it works in the Princess Bride because it's a fairy tale story. But when you're playing your game, it can feel a little too a little too convenient to have like, well, now you're here and this is here. And so having an idea of these are what these lands are ahead of time, it helps to not feel like you're just throwing in whatever you felt like at the moment or whatever map you could grab online real quick.
I think with taking a map and trying to be as consistent as possible is also to really navigate the actual distance between things. You don't need to like write down this is 15 days apart, but just like kind of having a gauge of like how things move especially helps the players within strategy as well. Because if your game is heavily travel, then it's going to be helpful for the players to be able to know, okay, an inch represents a full day.
Yep.
And so now I can truly gauge how far we need to go to get to Chumanga, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 12 days of a journey. So now we know, or if we went around this, then it's just helpful for strategy.
Critical. Yeah, it's so helpful for making the game feel authentic. And it doesn't mean that 12 days of travel is going to be 12 weeks of campaigning. Or
No, don't do
you
that.
Can
I actually
wave,
don't want you to do that.
Yeah, hand wave as much as you can. Like Matt at Critical Role does a great job with, like, he has people, one person a day roll for travel stuff, and it's like, did anything exciting happen this day? We'll find out. If not, skip it next day. And but travel does make your game feel like this is an actual place instead of, well, the story requires me to be half a way around the world right now, so let's jump out and zip over there, and like, we're here now. And like, there needs to be the consequences of the world being real add natural conflict and natural engagement in the story.
That's good.
Yeah.
Can you say that in a different way as best as you can and rephrasing it?
Yeah. So like having these materials that we're building, like the inhabitants, the races, the gods, the continents, the locations, the magic and technology, all of that is not just useful background for the story, but actually helps create the story. Like the roadblocks that you create, you're not saying, this is insurmountable, but you're giving an opportunity for players to find a workaround, and that creates story life. Like, if they could actually do anything they wanted in the game, it would be so boring. The game only thrives when their desire to go do stuff butts against the reality of your limitations, of what you say, well, we can't do this thing because there is a monster there, or we can't go here because that's on fire, or like whatever. Like, you creating those obstacles, and like, so terrain is just saying, hey, you can't just zip through here in a day because these are crazy mountains that are filled with dangerous creatures. Like, that creates story. That creates
more opportunity for story, for creating different decisions around said potential flurries in the mountains of Agor, because and they're 12 days apart. Like, yes, I think that is so pivotal. I think that's so helpful, even to the point of just visualizing the world in a tangible way.
Yeah.
So with that, filling in that even a little bit more, going further, like into a continent specific, into the land.
We're zooming in. We're with our pinching on the phone here.
So kingdoms and organizations. Have you ever had a moment within a kingdom that, as a GM, or maybe as a player, where the kingdom felt, or the land, or the organization that you were going up to, just felt unnatural? And not just unnatural in the sense of like it's supernatural magic, but just like it didn't feel very fitting to where the story was going. Or
the thing I've run into the most with me is that everything has felt too small. Like, I have had stuff where, yes, you want to only have a certain amount of named NPCs because you don't want to drive yourself and the players crazy, but at some point they're like, what, the entire kingdom is run by these 3 dudes? Like is there anybody else? Or like who feeds these people? How does agriculture work? Like,
where does food come from?
Right,
if there's no crops,
right?
anywhere.
Exactly. If there's you're like, oh yeah, I didn't think about that part. All right, that's the kind of stuff where it's, you don't have to think about every single detail, but if it's like a large country or kingdom or group of people, it should feel large, and you should feel like I'm meeting one of many people. But then it can't also be that this is the only person I'm meeting. Like
right. And especially if your story is taking place in a centralized, we'll go to kingdom, or even just, we'll say a city actually, because I think that's potentially more applicable, where you're in one city. you would be able to know a lot of people. Like if if your players are living in that city, they're all from it. Then they're gonna need to know probably 10 to 20 different people already. And so letting them be the ones. So this is player world building now. Letting them be the ones that they create the NPC, they create the shop that they're in, and then you having that. I mean, that might be a little bit really granular for you as a GM. However, I think that would offer a little bit more realistic, experiential backstory for said player and their character.
I've always encouraged players, like, give me a handful of characters that your player knows. And we, like, in one game, it was fairly early on when I was doing this. One of my players, Kim, hi Kim, she came up with a nice list of characters, and she said that her character has been, trading and doing like dealings with this like one gnomish guy, and so I turned him into a fairly critical NPC for like giving them information and making some. So she's like, when we need this, I know a guy who does that stuff, and she was really great about like using stuff in her backstory that most people would just say it's a line item in the backstory, and she was great about bringing it into the game. And that let me, as the dungeon master, say, "Oh, that's a great opportunity to connect the story together, and tie things in." And so, like, she gets so invested and hooked in the world because, like, stuff that she made up is now a big part of the plot, right? And like doing that with your players. I mean, mileage varies, right? But doing that with your players, I feel like it brings it to life for both of you more.
Yes.
Because it feels like this world is so real and lived in that I, the DM, don't even know all the parts.
Yeah, and I think it's funny that when we play and we create our characters, I feel like I've never been in a game where anybody's had a real profession. Like or part of an organization, that they're always an adventurer, or like they're, which again, that's fine. There's no knocking at that, but it's just funny to think about, like, maybe within a kingdom and organization, we're not just talking about like the kingdom of blah blah blah. We're talking about also the political groups or governments that are working around the world, cults, down to even like, just different like professions.
The people who make food for you, the people who like a majority of the people in the city or town in a pre-industrial society, most of them are going to be in the trade or manufacturing of food. And a big portion of them will be in the trade or manufacturing of shelter. Those building the tools to make that stuff. That's like most of the people on this place. But it does feel like we focus on, the adventurers or the bartenders, and almost exclusively. And
again, no problem. There's
those
no.
Are fun. I mean, that's part of the game.
It is.
But like, what it would make sense to say, hey, this guy's a farmer, or this guy, his job is to shuttle in the carrots every day. Or he's the cabbages guy.
Well, and now we're talking too
Avatar,
about like, hey, that's awesome. But like, I think even in the kingdoms and organizations, and maybe in the continents too, it goes back to the technology. How does transportation actually work?
Right.
Like, how do you, like you said earlier, how does food supply get? What is the trade route? Is there mail? Like, do people have letter? Like, does mail happen?
I love it when PCs are like, I'm just gonna send this guy a letter, and I was like, with whom?
Are you running there?
Yes.
Yeah, seriously.
I just ran over and gave you this letter. I got to go back to my team.
But I think it's interesting that we're talking a lot about players and all this, because like versus the first section, or part one, where it's really a little bit less of that player involvement. Here, it's way more, which might be even the summarization of like. Of these five, which again, I want to just keep going here because I think the next one is my favorite, which is the creatures and monsters that then kind of live inside the world. Well, I'm thinking about what are the exact creatures that inhabit said terrain or that forest that you're in, and maybe at this point you could stop and be like, I don't need to map this out, but I'm just gonna say maybe there's some evil creatures here, right? Because I think creatures and monsters may get a little bit too granular. How do you feel about that?
I would say Tolkien did it well in that, like, the Shire feels like the rules are established. Like, you are not going to see monsters and dragons and weird creatures here. This is a safe place where people hang out and they eat and
drink, and do
eat, drink, and be merry.
Farm.
Exactly, and farm. And then they say, hey, this other area, there might be giant trolls here. And then in the mountains, people don't go in the mountains. So lots of weird creatures and stuff. Goblins have lived in the mountains and stuff. Oh, but then there's dwarves in these other mountains. He did a good job of making it feel like the expected amount of weird is like sort of proportionate to the amount of like settled population. And in his world, that made sense. So like you won't run into random creatures in the middle of a city. Other times it does, it can feel inconsistent when like you find like a giant dragon bird or whatever attacking, a 3-headed dragon or something attacking in the city. And it's sort of, the NPCs just are on pause mode again while the players fight. But it also should sort of feel like, is this a common occurrence? Like, is this Metropolis or Gotham City where like, a crazy bad guy is attacking every 5 minutes?
And they always get thrown out of, like, they escape jail every other week.
Exactly. Is this that sort of world? Or is this a world where like, if like a dragon attacking the city hasn't happened for hundreds of years, and that would be a life-changing event for everybody there. And like, and it's not like, oh, well, we're back to selling our goods for you at a reasonable price. But after that event, people all jack up their prices or shut their doors and no one's coming out because they're terrified of another dragon attack. They don't know what's happening.
Yep.
Like, or is it, well, another day in Gotham, might as well keep going. Like that, knowing and like, not just, I never bookend like what creatures exist because I always might find a more interesting one that I want to add. But I do book like how commonplace are they? Like I want to.
That's a good way of putting it. How often are they around, or where are they occupying a specific space? Typically,
right.
So that makes perfect sense, though. But I do think, for me personally, so maybe I don't know if this is you or anybody that's listening, I do similar to what you do, though. Is I will just have the particular area, and we'll be like, yeah, there's probably something very abyssal here, or there's something that's probably pretty celestial, whatever. Right. Just more of like a category, whatever.
Sure, categorical. There's like you say, you know what? This is a creepy place. There's going to be some sort of like, I'd call it like a Hammer monster, but that would be like Hammer horror films like Dracula, Frankenstein, Mummy, kind of like, there should be one of those kind of creepy things. Or over here, it's going to be, this is probably goblin territory or something like kobolds or goblins or like you have stuff where you're like, I don't know the exact stuff, or this is going to be like something insanely powerful is over here that's going to come in and like this spot. But I try not to pigeonhole myself because either A, your story gets in a rut, or B, like you will get FOMO. Like you'll see somebody else have a really awesome thing online or on a video, and you'll be like, that's a really cool creature. I want to go borrow that. Like, but it's not in my official rule book of my world. Well, guess what? You have the pen, you have the paper, you have the eraser. Go change it.
There it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think this is a good example of continuous world building, not world building and done type of thing.
Oh, yeah.
So, but which actually might be a little bit different than a calendar or a season or a holiday.
Which is the opposite. Yeah.
Which is really, So would you kind of take that away?
Sure. So like, I personally hate that you can't say
I love this.
Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, or whatever, that it's like, it's Bluck Day and Gruckdover. And like, I don't care, dude. Like, I don't have the mental capacity to remember all the specific, like, to remember. we're on an 8-day-a-week calendar, and that like we're in a 23-hour cycle in the day, and like that's too much math for me.
It doesn't, and it rarely, I want to say 99.9%, it doesn't matter to the story.
Doesn't matter. But there's definitely stuff you can do with the calendar, with the seasons, with holidays that can make for an interesting game.
Yes.
Like you can be building up to an important holiday that a lot of people are celebrating as an event or like a time limit in the game for the characters. Is like something has to happen before this big ceremony or before this annual lunar event. Like those are great time bound things that can make the game feel real. But also there's cultural stuff of like, instead of every day town just looks like town, you can say once a week is the fish market, and that's a time where everybody comes in from the nearby places, and it's a great time to like stealth in and sneakily do something because everyone's distracted. Or once a month, or like on this month they have, the equivalent of like a Halloween day or something where people all dress in costume, and it's a cool time to do this. Like those are all like, calendar stuff isn't gonna make or break your game, but it's like a launching point for interesting diversions in your story.
It's similar to like operating within an environment or a terrain. Like a terrain is there, a different type of a terrain is there to offer potential different environmental consequences that then establish a interesting story. In similar or conjunction to a season or a holiday, like winter is going to operate in your story and your character's decisions differently than the summer. I mean, it should, in my opinion.
I've never played in a game where like we went through seasons. Like the games have all mostly been in like, most of my games have taken place in a compressed amount of a couple of weeks in those campaigns, but it's never like past time where it's like it's gone from summer to fall or from fall to winter. Like hasn't happened, and including when I've run it, like that's been an area for improvement. Is like it doesn't always feel real. It feels like we're in this endless summertime that is,
everyone can sleep outside all the time.
All the time.
It's
no
gorgeous.
problem.
Or it's raining.
You all get a full rest outside no matter what, because there's never any trouble.
And so I even tried that. In my recent campaign that's actually on pause right now because individuals are needing to get married and blah, 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 blah. It started in November. And so it started, and then they actually were going out at sea. And so like they were like in iceberg type of travel within ships, and like there's freezing and cold, whatever. Again, if an ocean doesn't freeze over, it doesn't make sense, whatever. It's part of my game of Mars. But it's adding some way different skill checks and experiences that I would have never done if I wouldn't have tried and been like, okay, no, it's cold, it's winter, and you guys are outside, you're gonna sleep outside. Make a Constitution saving throw for tonight because it's dropping below 0.
Right, and you have to, and it's tough. It's not like, oh, I'm cruising here, no big deal. It's like you have to work to survive, which is a different game mechanic.
And it might not be something that you want to do as a player, like that, and that's fair. So
and
knowing that ahead of time,
and you might say, we'll keep this one in summertime, we'll make some of these rolls easier. We'll kind of hand wave some of that, but it definitely affects the game in material ways, and it's important to at least consider. And it doesn't mean you like endless summer is fine. Who's to say that that your game isn't taking place in like the equator and like
it's in the Bahamas, or your equivalent.
It's in fantasy Bahamas.
But to a season though, sorry, I'm gonna cut you off, but like to a holiday that could also operate within a deity, like or in a specific event.
Yeah, it connects back to like a historical event of like the day that the humans overthrew the orcs and took this land as a free thing, and that could lead to extra tension in your story because on this day everybody is remembering that, and so if they see an orc in town that day, people are gonna go nuts, or like you said, tying back to certain deities and like prayer for them that might be this is the day the deity tells you or shows you a glimpse of themselves or gives guidance for the future or something.
Love that.
Like all that can tie together and make it feel less like I'm going through the motions and more like we are like we are inside the story. And really, that's all world building is trying to do, right? Bring your players and you as the dungeon master, game master, into the story and feel like we're not just talking things, but we are living an adventure together.
I love that. I think all 5 of these particular elements are ways for more specific, granularized story elements, because it connects literally moment by moment and operating in a moment by moment story versus it being just like, here's the overarching story of the world, and it just may or may not matter as much as these ones on a day
On a day-to-day basis.
Thank you. I literally just forgot the words. But again, how would you summarize these 5 versus the other 5? Or maybe
Well, the other 5 were like, we call it like the foundation,
Yep.
right? Like you're laying the foundation for your world. And I really think these are like the walls and the roof of your story. So like you are, some people are afraid of boundaries and say like, I don't want to limit my players. But as I said before, like limitations actually help, because if you can do anything, if you don't have limitations, your story goes off the rails and isn't fun. Like the boundaries actually shape things instead of, well, I'm the ultimate guy who kills everything and everybody is dead and I'm the ruler of the end. Like the ability to not do that is what makes our human stories more human, more interesting. And we are defined by our obstacles and our limitations and how we overcome them. So this, like, the walls aren't there to block off good storytelling, but they're there to guide you through the house and to the best places. And so, like, I think it just enriches. Like, all this enriches your story and makes it just makes it a more full and, like, life-giving experience.
I love that. Well, I hope this week, those of you that are listening, that you can start to enrich your stories, take that foundation, build upon it, add some of these walls that Eric is sharing, and be able to build out an amazing story for not just you and your players, but just from the player side as well, where they can participate in building it out as well. But if you're someone that really doesn't know how to navigate these a little bit more, or if you want to navigate them more, or you're having trouble in certain ways, please message us at GM Smudge on TikTok and Instagram.
At Shafkus, which is a lot of letters, you can look up on the link below.
Exactly. And subscribe, hit the bell, follow on Spotify and Apple Podcasts so you can get notified each week when an episode drops. Please share. This is a great conversation that you can have with your party and grow as a GM and player. But comment below too. Is there anything that we missed? Is there anything that you would love to add to when it comes to world building and specifically your method as well? But once again, any other shout outs to your work or any other specific things that you want to highlight for you again?
I would just say, if you liked what we talked about, the Inspiration Vault has a lot more details on some of these areas, and we'd love to hear your feedback on that, or like future vault ideas, because we have a lot coming, but we love your input.
Perfect. Well, Eric, thank you so much for hanging again.
Thanks. It's been really fun.
Awesome. And lastly, make sure to add value to your game so that your game becomes more memorable. See you later.